Hey, hey, hey.
Hello.
I love that pickup at the end there. It's awesome.
Right?
So good. All right, we're talking live again. Culture Live. Love these chats, Adam. Love these chats.
Right? Yeah, we're going live. Woo. We have an
Woo!
exciting topic for today. It might be my favorite topic because it's the hardest one. But
Uh-huh.
what are we talking about today?
Measurements. Oh my gosh, measuring. So we said measuring success and measuring to fail. So this is like really interesting for us is the metrics in the business and the behaviors that they drive,
Hmm. Yeah,
right?
I think metrics are so tricky because you say whatever gets measured gets done, right? And I think it's people agree that if you want to succeed or accelerate success, you measure it and then you iterate based on that. Like I think nobody can argue that point, right?
Yeah. But what is it doing to your culture?
Hmm. And what do we mean by that, right? Like you measure something like a financial profitability, whatever. That's great. But then if you dig down, what is it driving behaviors, right? And we actually have a story from our own team about causing weird behaviors. Um,
Right? Yes. Tell us the story.
we had our kind of work split into three buckets. We had business improvements, we had video stuff, and we had social media stuff. And so we were measuring the profitability of each
Division.
department, each division. Makes sense, right? Thought we were being smart. But what happened was the video guys and social media guys share resources. And what they started to do was hoard resources to either side because they were worried about
Their
their
profit.
profitability versus the other person's. And if I share, then they'll look better than I am, and blah blah blah. And that was the kind of language that was starting to come out. And we're like, oh wow, this is not at all what we want, right? Um, and I think that is a great example for large companies in general, right? That are split up into the
We see it all the
boardrooms
time.
with all the VPs, right?
We see it all the time. Like every VP is like so in charge of their department and being
Mm-hmm.
held to task on their department instead of held to task on the greater initiative,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it does become very siloed in these big corporations. We see it all the time. Like, I don't want to support them because I don't get any credit for it.
And we saw this at a company that was really trying to push work share. This group cooperate with this group. They had like campaigns about it. They had a
Oh,
procedure for
yeah.
it. But at the end of
Tier
the day,
one,
they couldn't figure out how to measure it so that if you collaborated, who gets credit? And that
right?
was really tricky for them because they were trying to drive this collaborative behavior, and they really struggled to find a metric that could equate to that. Right?
Yeah. And it's funny because you see it in divisions, departments, but you'll also see it in companies with acquisitions,
Hmm.
right? You'll see that like, well, we're this company, right? They never integrate the cultures
Hmm.
and they're still worried about whether they're showing profitability, right? There is no greater initiative. But we touched on a couple things here. And one of the things that you talked about was like, oh, um, like driving the behaviors. What behaviors does it drive? And I think that's
Hmm.
the biggest thing. We set metrics with the best intent, just like we did, to
Right?
drive the business. But we didn't stop and go, what are all the possible behaviors? Because people will game it. Let's be honest. People will always game the metrics,
Hmm. How can I rig this? Right?
right? Look at our
Absolutely.
favorite, look at our favorite national coffee company,
Right?
right? Their metric at the drive through is from the time you order to the time you get your coffee. So what do? They make you wait at the speaker.
To catch up. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So my experience isn't any better as a customer.
Hmm.
I'm just waiting further back, right? So it's so interesting to see. And like from a corporate standpoint, if you're not sitting in that line, you would never know. You'd be like, wow, that guy's doing really good. That franchise is like on it. Their response time's so fast.
There's a
No,
book.
there's further down the line.
So coffee, there's a book by Howard Schultz called Onward, and
Okay.
talks about his company, and what they were measuring is called comps, which I guess is it's a metric where they compare you against like this store against that store against that store. So you're like
Right.
measured against each other. And the stores figured out that they can make better reports by selling the stupid little knickknacks in the store. So what you started to see was you go and wait in line for coffee, and all of a sudden these stands started to appear with like stupid mugs and stuffies and crap. And that's what was driving the comps up. So then one day he went into his store and he's like, what the hell is this? This is not the experience that I created. This is not the Italian coffee experience that I brought to Canada. Like we were not selling knickknacks and crap like that. And he went back and he checked, and sure enough, all this it was changing the whole feel and atmosphere of the store because they were getting, little bits of profit on these stupid knickknacks, right?
Which a metric they are being measured on.
Mm-hmm. So people figured out how to game it, right?
Oh,
And so he stopped measuring them, and the shareholders went crazy because that's one of the key metrics they had to report to shareholders. And he stood his ground. There's an interesting story about how that unfolded, and it just really stood out to me as it's like there's a metric that I'm reporting that is destroying the atmosphere and culture of what I tried to create right from the beginning.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, let's talk about our favorite metric
Ooh,
that
yeah.
that destroys culture so much, because we work with a lot of engineering, oil and gas, construction companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And utilization is something they measure. So for anybody who doesn't know what utilization is, it's how chargeable your employees are out to their clients, right? And so if you're 100% utilized, then you're not wasting any money anytime. You're literally every hour you work is charged out on a project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this concept of measuring utilization in a lot of these corporations, and we see corporations who measure utilization, which is fine, but how
Mm.
they communicate it is where it kills their culture.
Yeah, I think like you have to measure utilization. If you're a paid by the hour company, you have to measure it. It's how you figure out if you're going to make money and if you're going to exist or not, right?
Right.
So
Very important.
yeah, very important. But I've seen it done a few different ways. On some levels, like management is looking at that and reporting it, but like the actual employees never see it, right? They might get asked like, "Hey, what are you working on? Let's get you on some more
Fill out your
projects or
time
whatever."
cards, whatever. Yeah.
Whatever, you float your time card. But I've also seen it where it's pushed all the way down to the employee, where like the employee is terrified of dropping below a certain percentage for fear of repercussion, right?
Totally.
So
And especially when times are hard, like we know that industry's cyclical.
mhm,
Right?
right.
And when times are hard, like shit rolls downhill and it goes down to the employees. And you saw it where people were so scared, right? And what behaviors did it drive? Let's talk about the behaviors that it drive. So the problem wasn't measuring utilization. It was the
No, in
communication.
fact,
It was like you better be utilized or you could be next, right? Chopping block.
and if I imagine the conversation at the shareholder level, it's like, hey, look, we've got this system. Everyone's going to know how utilized they are. It allows us to react and make sure and stay profitable. And I imagine that conversation was like, wow, amazing. This is like great job,
Good
right?
tool. Good
Yeah.
information.
But then how did it feel at the employee level when you're going and doing your timesheet and you're like, shit, I'm only 85. I'm supposed to be 93, right? So what
Yeah.
do you do?
Slow down.
Sure.
Slow down.
Yeah.
If I write this email slower, it'll take up a full half hour. I can charge that back to the client. I can't work efficiently. I gotta slow
Mhm.
down. My utilization will go up. That's how I
Mhm.
that's how I game that. Okay, I'm gonna slow down. Somebody
Good.
comes along and is like, "Wow, you're doing really tedious work. You could automate this and it would speed up your time." No, don't do
Right?
that. Don't we're charged out by the hour. I can't be efficient. No innovation. So now you're inefficient on purpose. No innovation on purpose,
Mhm.
right? What else does it drive? Like
Oh,
fear-based behaviors, man. You're
it
scared.
does. Yeah.
You're working scared.
You're terrified of being the one blown, especially if you do in a situation where there are layoffs or things like that happening. There is
Yeah,
no way you're filling out that time card and dropping below your goal. So it's all bullshit. It's all
right?
fake. You'll start throwing stuff at the timesheet dark bar to fill it up. Right? Of course you will.
100%.
Um,
So it can drive really bad behaviors.
mhm.
But that's not because you're measuring it, it's because how you communicated it. Like, but if the same engineering company measures utilization and uses that to say to their sales team, "Hey guys, we need to do a new campaign this week, or we need to get out some exos for marketing. We need to fill our bucket 6 months from now. Like, let's get started. How can we fill this? We're seeing utilization start to." That's great. Now
Mhm.
you're using that knowledge to fill the system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The feedback loop drives targets, drives, all that kind of stuff. And you need that, especially for sales, right?
Totally. You gotta
But
know when your runway runs out,
right?
right?
It's like trying to measure culture by how many people attended the social committee event, right? It's one measure, right? But
Maybe.
yeah, like I don't know. I guess you always have to be involved in what's going on if you're going to measure something like that. If you're too far removed from it and you're just pulling the spreadsheets or the numbers, you have
Yeah,
no idea what's actually happening, right?
yeah,
So you've got to
absolutely.
kind of watch. That's the thing with culture. You kind of watch those behaviors, right? Innovation, by nature, it's inefficient because you have to try stuff and fail and try stuff and fail and try stuff and oh, okay. So like different metric, different thing to measure. Utilization is not the whole story. Measure something
It's
else
not.
to go with that, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. And
I,
and I think too, like, we love, Stephen Covey's 40X model, right?
mhm,
Where
yeah.
you're talking about strategically pushing on one thing and then engaging all personnel in their capacity to push on a behavior that they have control of with the hat that they wear,
Mhm,
right? And the example that Stephen Covey gives, or the Franklin Covey Institute gives, they had a grocery store, right? Wanted to increase profits. So you can't say to the stock person, "Hey, we want to increase profits. You need to help," because they're going to go, right? But when you go back to it and say, like, "Okay, that's the end, but what behavior do you do that helps with that?" They go, "Well, I can make sure that the shelves are always fully stocked and our premium stuff's, like, fully visible."
right?
Oh, okay. That's a behavior you can do. And they went to the cleaners and they said, "Well, what can you guys do?" "Well, we can make sure that, everything's always clean and organized so that it's an easy transition through to, get to where they're going, and everything
Mhm,
is, like, displayed nicely." "Oh, okay." So, like, they had these behaviors of the people who wore the hats, right?
mhm.
Their profits went through the roof. But if they had just said to them, "We wanna increase profitability," so many people will be like, "Well, I don't impact that." "Oh, but you do."
Well, and what I really like about that story is how they translate it into, okay, profitability is the goal. What do we need to do to get there? It's like, well, we need to improve the customer experience. What else do we need
Yeah.
to do? We need to improve the visibility of premium items, right? What else do we need to do? That's
Yeah.
it. Those two items. We do those two things. So everybody, how can we improve the customer experience? And now everyone can look at that through their own lens and be like, oh, well, I can fix the storeroom. I've been meaning to do it forever. Oh, I can move these premium items. Oh, you know what? It will shorten lineups if we do this, that, and the other. oh, you know what?
right?
Right? Versus the one we talked about where it's like, we just move the lineup over here to keep this clear, right?
Yeah. And so everybody contributes. They feel
Mhm.
like they're part of a greater whole, right? They
Mhm.
see, but the other thing that the Franklin Covey like 40X model does, and this was one thing that we implemented that helped when we had our little division issue, pivot. If it
Mhm.
doesn't work, right? You measure weekly the behaviors and your commitments, and then monthly you measure, is it working? Are we doing the right behaviors or do we need to pivot? Right? Is it driving
Mhm.
the right behaviors? Is it having an effect? Do we need to change? And I think so many times when we put metrics in place, we just leave them.
Right. And I think you leave them because whatever, reporting some stuff up every month, right? It's not, it's indirect. So you're not seeing the, the, the immediate result that happens over time, right?
Yep.
Um, and I think there's so many things you can measure, right? I remember back in the day when we were first started talking about this stuff, like even before Enta, I remember sitting in your office and being like, okay, we need to measure this thing. Should we do the number of things divided by the total number of hours of everyone or the total number of hours of the individual, and like arguing over like what should be on the denominator to make this unitless measure,
Yeah.
right? And like spending half an hour being like, okay, how would I game that? What would I do? What would I think when I saw that? How would I feel?
Right.
And like that was the process, and it was really hard. And I think it
What
was the first time I
message
really
did
started.
the metric send?
Yeah. And I think what message could it send? What emotions it was going to bring up? Like, there's all this stuff you can do um, when it comes down to that behavioral piece, right? You have your financial metrics, which of course are pretty standard and stuff. But like you said, how am I going to communicate it? What's it going to do to these people? And maybe it drives the right behavior with these guys, but not with those guys. So now what am I going to do? Right? Do I need
Right?
a whole other metric or two different metrics or whatever? You got to like constantly play with it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
And there's going to reach a point where, okay, we don't need to measure that anymore.
mhm.
Right?
Yeah, that evolution, right? It's like, I don't know. Let's measure. If I'm going to measure, I don't know, innovation. Let's say I might just start with how many items were put into the suggestion box. That's my measurement. That's it,
Right.
right?
We're trying to create a reporting culture.
Yeah, just stick it in. We got 5 this week. Awesome, guys. Next we got 7. Woo, we got
Yeah.
10. Doesn't
People
matter
are
what they
opening
are,
it up. That's a
right?
win. After a while, the culture exists of people
Hmm.
being open.
Yeah.
So what do you really want to measure now?
Right.
So like I love that. It's how we do this with NCRs. NCRs,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
When you first start a quality management system in a company, you measure how many NCRs are reported because you want to create an open culture. And then people like put in an NCR and they're like, oh,
Mhm.
I didn't get penalized. Okay. Oh, they fixed it. Oh, okay. I'll put another one. And then they test the system and they're like, sweet, this is my avenue to fix stuff, right?
Mhm.
Or opportunities for improvement or innovation or whatever. But then once that reporting culture is open, like if you looked at your metrics and said, oh my gosh, our NCRs are going up. No. That's not what's happening. The behaviors are changing and people are opening up. You're going to reach a plateau where, like, as you're fixing stuff, like this is it. It kind of levels out. So stop
Mhm.
measuring it. Now you want
Mhm.
to measure something else, right?
Sure, the impact or the quality of the stuff or
Effectiveness of your
like
solutions.
whatever,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, you evolve to that, right? The number of things, just get them in the box, to like the quality of what's being submitted, to the impact of what it's doing. Like there's a evolution, and that can happen in multiple areas. Right? You got to think of metrics. Like we always talk about this, like three-dimensionally. Start here and then build it up, right? Everything around you is three-dimensional, even if you're only seeing what's right in front of your face, right?
Yeah.
So
100%. The other thing I think is really interesting, Adam, is like we have the metrics that, so okay, so what did we say? We said like look for the behaviors around metrics, the good, the bad, right?
Mhm.
Communicate them, and then change it up on a regular basis, right? Those are the three things. Like change it up when it's not working. Like be aware of the cultural impact. Like we do our little mind, body, soul culture process tools, right? If they're impacting, if your process or your measurements are impacting your culture in a negative way, like watch for that. But so many times we just leave all these metrics going. And then this is the interesting thing. We never ask people to stop measuring. We ask them to measure more things, even though we're not relying on the data anymore.
Oh, I love this story. Like, how many times have you seen it? Like, either the consultant or the new leader or whatever comes in and was like, "How long does it take you to put together all these metrics in this report?" Well, it takes me a day. I do it once a month. It's like a full day. Awesome. Who do you give it to? Well, I give it to James. Cool. James, what do you do with this report? You give it to? I don't know. I drop it in the folder, and Shelly over in accounting gets it. Great. Shelly, what do you do with this report when you get it? Oh, I just put it on the back of the the monthly report or whatever, and that goes all the way up to
The VPs.
Caitlin, right? Good. Caitlin, what do you do with this stuff at the end of the year? I don't know. No one looks at that. Right?
Always.
It happens
This
all the
is where
time.
we always hear. And so,
Right?
like, literally, hundreds of thousands of dollars are wasted in unnecessary reporting,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Oh
all
yeah.
the time. Because, like, somebody thought it was a good idea to report it once,
But I think this
and
is
it
the
became
tricky
part of
part,
this.
right? And I think even in our own business, this is an issue. Is like, think about how much time and energy and effort and thought we just talked about metrics, right? Who's going
Yep.
to do it? Who's going to own it? Who's going to own the suite of metrics and what you're meeting, how you're communicating? Like, that's like a whole role
Yeah.
there, right?
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
I think we too so often just like tuck it into like the CFO is going to report on some financials and whatever, right? Um, but
Yeah. There's
you
so
can
much,
make.
and I love this too, like, you give contractors, like, all these expectations too, right? If you're the owning
Mhm.
company and you give it to contractors, you need to report on this, 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 this. Sometimes the reporting is 50% of the budget of the scope of work. Like, fit for purpose, but they
Yeah.
have, like, these one contractual terms that it's like, "This is how we have to report all projects."
Well, and even
It's
that
like,
can be gamed, right? Like, often you have what's called like your management like contingency bucket or whatever. And as you're reporting on a project, you can move that contingency around to make it look either better or worse, um, to whatever you want it to do, right? So, like, even in there, you're gonna be like, "Ooh, that's not a good story. I don't want to tell that.
let's change how that
Move this
story
over here."
sounds.
Yeah, right.
It's true. It's true. There's a lot of assumptions made in your project reporting, even like your CPI and
Mhm.
SPI and stuff like that. There's assumptions made that you can adjust,
Right.
right?
So it's like
And
WIP, work in progress, right? Every month, the different divisions will they'll play with exactly what is work in progress and what is not, and they'll you know, or especially in like quarter ends or year ends, all of a sudden there's like more compressed into here instead of over there, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Commission
Absolutely.
is another great one, right? Commission around you've got a monthly commission. You will either reach your commission and stop working, or sometimes you'll pull from like the next month into this month to make it look whatever. So
Yeah,
you're gaming the deadline and selling less, which is not
right?
what you want, right?
Or people have commissions where they're capped commissions, and then people are like, "Well, reached my cap. It was super easy. I'm not going to work for the rest of the month.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah,
Why
exactly.
would I? I'm not earning anything on it, right?" So like
Yeah.
sales commissions in itself like drive a whole set of behaviors for sales groups, right? So it's really interesting conversation.
Mhm.
One thing I want to touch on because I know we only have 4 more minutes is measuring culture.
Mm.
How do you measure that you have an engaged culture?
I mean, there are things you can look at turnover is an indication, right?
Yeah.
I think
The one I really like is the NPS score, right? Is how willing are your employees to recommend your company to their friends or family?
hmm, yeah, that's a good one,
That's
right?
great. Like, because if somebody's shouting it from the rooftop, right? They're a champion, right? They're a 9 or 10, they're a champion, you know? If
And this,
they're
this is what the engagement surveys are trying to do is measure, right? You use a Likert scale, and I agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or whatever, and you can try and score it, right? And
yeah,
then, Gallup has their Gallup 30, or I can't remember how many it is, right? Do you have a best friend at work? Do you
yeah,
there's some that have been developed by very smart people, very well versed in psychology, right? To do all this stuff. But
when it comes down to it, it's the NPS score. Like, how willing are you to recommend them?
yeah, it's a great one, right? We're just asking
And I
people.
love that. I love that, there's this new AI software, Craddock.ai,
Hmm,
that not only measures the NPS score through their system, but they also use the system with the process. So it's the tool, the process, and the people coming together to move the needle, right? And that's the tool we use when we go in and people say, "Well, I want to measure." Perfect. We're going to use this tool because the tool in itself helps move the needle,
hmm,
right? So if you're going to measure something, use a tool that actually helps move the needle. That's to me, that's a no-brainer. It's a win, right? But they measure the NPS score because those surveys, like the Gallup surveys and stuff like that, there's a whole bunch of assumptions in the background of those surveys. And somebody might be like, well, I don't think that does play into culture. It might, right? They've done the studies, but just keeping it so simple, I love that. First of all, it's one survey question. You don't have to go through 30 pages. Your people are going to answer that. And
right.
two, it's just so simple. Would you recommend us or not? It is so simple.
Sometimes the temptation, maybe the last point I'll make here, is to complicate metrics, to start measuring this and that. Oh, what about this? Like, you start overthinking it, right? Trying for perfection. When at the end of the
Yep.
day, like you said, maybe it's just one question, and that's enough for you to, it's not going to tell you specifically every little thing, but it's an indicator of kind of where you are. And it's always relative, right? You've asked it 5 times. It's going up or going down, which is maybe the more interesting part of that, right? Um,
Absolutely.
you can map over time and look like, we had a dip there. What was going on at that time? Oh, well, we laid off 3 people, or that
Right?
person we hired that was a wrong fit that was there for 3 months. Look what it did, right? You can start mapping it against events, kind of like, hey, look, there's
Right.
our barbecue. Ooh, it went up, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think like we talked about so many metrics, but the key things is metrics will drive behaviors, good or bad. So like before you set a metric in place, think of the behaviors it's going to drive, which is going to help you on how you want to communicate it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because how you communicate it and how you use that data will drive behaviors. And then lastly, if it's not working or you're seeing it's driving the wrong behaviors, you need to shift your communication or shift the metric, right? So don't set it in stone. And then I think the last thing we touched on, so I know we usually do 3 tips, but this is number 4, is make sure you're using the data. If you're not, stop wasting your time reporting it,
Right?
right? There's so much of that. It makes me laugh. It makes me laugh. We're like, well, who's using it? Well, what assumptions are made in this data? Well, we don't know. Well, how useful is this data? I don't know. We just attach it to the report.
Right? Well, yeah.
I don't have time to read that 30-page report. I don't know what to do. I love it. It's hilarious. So, 4 tips for measuring success so that you don't measure to fail.
There you go. So have fun measuring.
Have fun. We'll see you next time. All right. Thanks, guys.